Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello Scott.
Josh, my friend, another video about God of War spoilers. You have been warned, big, full-on, end-game, all-game spoilers, because we're going to talk about the general reaction to God of War Ragnarok, and especially its ending, especially the final third, because I feel like as a lot more people have finished the game, there's an emerging conversation of, is that it, in regards to what Ragnarok actually is, in regards to what the final fight actually is, and then various things that kind of tie into that in terms of pacing issues, or what could be perceived as pacing issues. But we're going to balance that out with some more positive stuff, because I feel that's why it's so divisive. I don't feel like it's being held up as, or we don't feel it's being held up as just a general, this thing sucks.
No.
It's just that there's a bit of back and forward in regards to what people like and what they don't. So yeah.
Before we get in, it's kind of like what you want out of the story. I think the people who wanted like answers to the lore, who were in for like the actual plot beats of the mythology, the Horn, the Jormungandr, stuff like that, they, from what I've gathered on Reddit and Twitter, seem more annoyed than the people kind of like me, who are more interested in the thematics and like the character psychology and stuff. And I don't think one's necessarily wrong, because if you're into the lore stuff, I do have issues with how that rolls out over the end.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify before we start.
No, same. I think that we kind of complement each other in that regard, because I think the side of it that's like, you guys seeded this thing and you didn't pay it off like as much as they could have. I think that is a valid talking point. But I think, or we think overall, there is way more in that game to talk about that is more valid. But we'll get there, and we'll try and cover as much stuff as possible. Let's go with the most meatiest thing though, which is Ragnarok itself, the depiction of the potential end of the world, the end of the realms, the collapsing of the realms, and the way that the game presents it. I think a lot of people were expecting something more akin to Kratos leading an army. There's a whole thing across the game of whether or not he's going to, give into his old warrior ways, become a general, like Atreus said. And towards the end, you are bringing various characters together to make the stand against Odin, to fight across Asgard. And then the reality of that gameplay sequence is a series of quite small fights against sort of 3 or 4 enemies, little pockets of enemies in various walled-off arenas, and then eventually a final fight against Thor and Odin. What do you think of that? I didn't personally mind that, but I get why people were expecting something grander.
And I totally see that as well. For me, the actual set piece itself was still a spectacle. It wasn't, on the level of the original God of War trilogy or anything like that. I would have liked, personally, to have been fighting up Ragnarok itself somehow. That would have given me vibes from the previous games. But I also get why it is presented as it is as well, because obviously they're planning this war like last minute. They quickly scramble to try to unite the realms, and ultimately a lot of those realms don't actually turn up. Like the warping towers get destroyed before some armies can even properly arrive, and it's kind of this thing that starts or finishes before it's even properly started. And I see why people are kind of annoyed by that. It was still, in that specific example, enough of a spectacle for me to still enjoy it and not feel like it had been kind of like downsized. To me, it was still epic to see Jormungandr and Thor fighting, even if it was in the background, to see the elves coming in above you, to see Ragnarok emerge after you think that he might not turn up and start absolutely decimating people with his giant sword. There was still enough there where I was like, that looks sick.
It does. It looks incredible. I feel like an overall conversation as well in regards to God of War Ragnarok is almost like that Marvel feel to bits and pieces of it, and that bit, the whole sequence at the end does feel like the big final fight in Endgame, where it's like so much is kicking off in the foreground, in the micro, and then also in the macro, in the background and everything, and it does feel very epic. Like I said, I thought it worked well enough. I wasn't sitting there going, I'm not satisfied, but like I said, I totally get that you could have had armies on screen, you could have taken full advantage of the PlayStation 5's SSD, but then it wouldn't be on PS4.
As a mission, I think it's good. I just do agree with people who say the ending is a little bit rushed. That doesn't ruin the game for me by any means. I still think the ending is good overall, but from the big tier twist onwards, I feel like the plot points come thick and fast. Like the uniting of the realms feels like a big deal, and yet it's all done off screen in the space of 5 minutes. The characters just go and do it, and again, it doesn't mind. I'm not annoyed too much because we get where we need to be, but considering how slow and methodical the plotting had been up until then, it just kind of feels strange, for instance, that we spend a few hours in a dwarven labyrinth at the start of the game, and yet we quickly run through some what I would perceive as major plot points, like the uniting of the realms, like the attack on Asgard itself. It's like, in isolation, the core components aren't bad by any means. In fact, they're good. It's just so much happens at the end of the game that it feels like, could they have split this into 2 games rather than
I think that's the overarching thing, is that a lot of people didn't realize, and even as we were like leading up to launch, it wasn't that obvious that this is the last game in the Norse mythology. I know it's been talked about, and it's been in some interviews where sort of Corey said, look, this is the last game in the Norse mythology, and we didn't want to spend 15 years overall with the same set of plot lines and characters and stuff. But very recently, he's just said that they are going to do another game. The idea that what happened to Jormungandr, how that thing went back through time, will be answered in a different game. We've done a whole other video on that, so go check that one out. But there is is that idea of maybe at some point it was sketched out as a trilogy, various work was done on cutscenes and characters and levels, etc. That as the story progressed, I know that game development isn't linear and whatever, but it does feel like parts of the game were more belabored than others, with the view of doing something else down the line that then couldn't happen, or for whatever reason, or whether that was just a choice or whatever. But like Josh said, there are specific things that just feel kind of cut off. The idea that Freya, not Freya, but Freyr, her brother, is trying to unite the light and dark elves, and just says, I'm going to attempt to unite the elves, flies off, and then flies back in during Ragnarok and just says, yeah, it's done.
Yes.
And it's just kind of like, oh, okay, sure. I think that taken alongside the background Jormungandr stuff, when that was a big plot point from 2018, and who blew the Horde and stuff like that, it does kind of stand out. And there is also a very potentially protracted, it feels like it jars out of the game's story quite a bit, hunting sequence, where because of the tier twist, you get Atreus. I like the fact that he defaults back to, let's go hunting, the same way that Kratos kind of buried his emotions. I get what they're trying to do there. What direction, in the direction of deer, like whatever. There's all that, but it only lasts for about 5 minutes. It's immediately pulled back again.
There are 2 moments in the final run that I do think are genuinely not executed well. Not just that they're rushed or they didn't land as good as they could be, but they genuinely fall flat. One is that hunting sequence, because you get the big twist with Tyr, which is awesome. You get Brock's death, which is incredibly emotional. And then it feels like Kratos is done. He says, like, this is me, Atreus, come on, we're going. 5 minutes later, they're going hunting, which again makes sense. I get that Atreus kind of wants to do something to take his mind off it, but then we don't really get the character switch for Kratos where he kind of says, no, we need to go back. It's like, that happens in the space of 5 minutes to the point where it's kind of like, well, why even do the change to begin with? It felt very quick. And the second thing that I also don't think is very well executed is the turn for Sif, who all the way through the game, very clearly does not like Odin and is trying to whisper in Thor's ear to say, look, stand up to your father. But the last time we see her, before her kind of like, she helps you in the final act, is her sicking the Valkyries on you and sicking Thor on you specifically, saying like, kill Atreus, look what he's done. And we don't get to see her kind of making amends with Atreus or wanting to work with Kratos, who killed her children, by the way. These two people killed her children. And yes, you could argue it's partly Odin's fault, but you would think that she would have more of a grudge there. And it was just that character moment just didn't feel as earned as it would have in an ending that kind of had more time to breathe and more time to develop those certain plot points. But in the grand scheme of things, they are kind of like 2 moments in a game that is so rich. So it's like, they don't completely drag it down. They stood out. Yeah, no, I definitely back that. I think in that particular thing, I was like, well, I guess Thrud was kind of always on Atreus' side, and Sif cares about Thrud, because you have that scene, you can walk into them talking in the one of the bedrooms when you're in Asgard, and I was like, oh, if that's what Thrud wants, then maybe that's what Sif goes with, to trust the parents, kind of like a reflective thing on Kratos going along with what Atreus wants, or whatever. But I do agree that there could be way more screen time for that, and way more fleshing out of those things. I think those are the biggest negatives. I don't think there's anything else on that side. The mask.
Oh my god,
I don't necessarily agree with this either, but it is worth flagging up that I think a lot of people from the discussion that I have seen personally, you guys might differ, seem to be annoyed that the mask and Odin's entire plan ultimately amounts to nothing, because Atreus breaks the mask, we don't get to see what was in the tear or anything like that. It works for me thematically, because in that moment it's Atreus writing his own story. All the way through the game, it's people saying you don't want to know what comes next, you don't want to be dictated by fate. So if Atreus or even Odin put on the mask and saw all the answers to the universe, like that would kind of go against the old theme of the message. But I kind of also understand people a little bit annoyed that you spend such a large portion of the game putting that mask together, thinking about what could be in the tear, and then ultimately you don't get to see.
I think it's a really, because I had that down as one of the positive things, but it is one of the most divisive elements. But it works for me as this sort of encapsulation of, even if you had all the keys to the universe, even if you had all the answers to the universe, what are you really going to do with them? Like, what really matters in your life is likely family, human connection, or actual bonds with people, or humanity. That's probably the thing that you should focus on. That's definitely the message of the game. And when Odin says to Atreus, after he's been completely weakened, and Atreus is preparing to spare him, and then Odin says, I'll never stop searching, I'll always just keep looking for that next thing, rather than invest time in Thor and his family, etc. Atreus says, I wish you'd never said that, and that's what leads to his spirit being put in one of the giant's balls, lol, as a sentence, which then leads to Sindri smashing him. But what a hell of a sentence, giant's balls and smashing him, but it's, as you do. And but still, I think that overall message is pretty incredible. I think that's a good reflective thing to have as an audience, that idea of the idea of how much were you looking forward to what was inside the mask versus how much can you take away from the depictions of Kratos and Atreus and family in that game.
Yes.
Because that's the thing that really matters, and that's kind of what the game is trying to tell you, that is more satisfying than just a nebulous thing through a tear in reality yet again.
Unfortunately for me, I did find that more satisfying.
Same.
So the ultimate point worked, because I think for as much as we've talked about there about things being rushed, certain things not hitting, a lot of it being divisive, I honestly don't mind because the character work is so strong. And ultimately, when I'm playing through Ragnarok, yes, I love the spectacle of it, but the reason I'm there is for the character relationships and to see how these two are going to reconnect by the end. What is their relationship going to look like? And the moments that you get that develop their relationship in this final third are, in my opinion, the best of the entire game.
Yes.
So emotional, so well done. Such turning points for both of them as heroes, as characters, as people, as gods, that, yes, it's not perfect, but it's still bloody good, man. It's still amazing.
Stuff like that. I mean, that's a good pivot point, because I feel like a lot of the division, the divisiveness, the conversation is hinging on the value of the Kratos Atreus stuff and the depictions, the cinematics, and the general themes of fatherhood, manhood, parenthood, whatever. And the things that come from Atreus' side as well, of forging your own path as a teenager and growing up, versus that idea of on paper professorial stuff and paying off the lore side of things. And yes, they maybe could have done both, but I feel like the message of the game is to treasure the family side of it and treasure the connective side of it, connection side of it, and the emotional side of it, more than just filling out the lore side of it. That said, who blew the horn, Josh? Who blew the horn?
Who blew the horn?
Who blew the horn? But in terms of covering the positive side of it, like I said, I think this is a good pivot point, because one of the best scenes in the game is Kratos very much accepting that Atreus is going to go forward and forge his own path, and literally say, Loki will go, but Atreus will remain. One of the greatest lines in the entire franchise. Christopher Judge's performance. I mean, I just cried everything Kratos does anyway at this stage, because I've been with the dude for 17 years. I care a lot that old dad is feeling. So I like that a lot. But that scene, in that moment, you either knew if that was satisfying enough or not.
Totally.
And I feel like that's one of the best parts about the whole game, the sort of encapsulation of Kratos' journey across 17 years.
100%, man. Like, when I think about the ending, yes, I see Ragnarok causing havoc, but I see that scene. I see Kratos in the tent with Atreus, reading him what he thinks might be the final story he ever reads to him, kind of like breaking up at the idea that tomorrow everything might change. He might not be there. Atreus might be going on his own. I'm getting chills right now just describing it, and I'm describing it poorly. So this is like a testament to how much it works in the game itself. Like, yeah, it is those... It's those moments, it's those tender, vulnerable moments that you rarely see in any game, but it's specifically one about gods killing other gods. In the fact that we've got to this point in their relationship that they're willing to open up in that way, that to me is the climax of the game. That to me is the finale of everything we've been building up towards.
I would back that too. I think that they also give you an extra little layer if you also want that professorial side of it, that box ticked kind of thing. Obviously you don't get answers to who blew the horn or whatever, but you do get a little bit more from Faye, the idea that like giants can see the future and can map out the future in various paintings and everything else. Faye being Kratos' wife, the whole reveal at the end of the 2018 game. Yes. What are you thinking?
I just know where you're going with it. I'm already getting excited about what you're going to talk about.
The whole idea that she sort of mapped out exactly where you were going to go in 2018's game. That's where all those markers were across the level, which they don't really address in this one, but those markers are back again, which they kind of reveal the same thing again at the end of Ragnarok, that Faye had seen so much of Kratos' future, that she'd made this mural that shows Kratos as ostensibly the next leader of the realm, ostensibly the next Odin or whoever the people look up to.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that finally breaks Kratos, and he sort of has to take a minute, and he gets a bit teary-eyed, or at least I assume that he does, because it very much feels like he does. Just knowing that this person did love him and did want the best for him and did want the best for the realms, and that's a good mix of him as a person and the realms as a professorial thing.
And what a way to end his arc, man. And I love the line that's said to him earlier on in the game. People are talking about what he even knows, what it means to be a god. Like, you don't know, you don't even know what it is to be a god. Yes, you're strong. Yes, you've killed other gods. Yes, you've come into this realm, but you've never been worshipped. That specifically, you've never been worshipped, and the implication that you've never been worthy of being worshipped. What have you brought to the world? What have you done for the people? And then by the end, when he kind of realizes that, he could be a god that does good. He could be a god that people genuinely look up to. He could be considered to be a god in the kind of more metaphorical sense rather than the literal sense. What a way to end that character arc, man, because he would not have even considered taking on that role in the 2018 game, and he
No.
probably wouldn't have even considered taking on that role at the start of this. It's only with what he learns and what he does and how he helps selflessly rather than just for his family that he ends up in that position where Atreus can go, and he's not going to be a recluse. He's going to be someone who actively helps and tries to develop the connections that he's made in the realm. Awesome.
I think that stuff works extremely well. As well, because you have God of War as a franchise has been this, obviously in various different ways. The older games were way more just go happy, super over the top, very, brutal games. I love the whole, all of them. Apart from God of War 3. I'm a big God of War 2 guy. But overall, though, God of War 3 plays really well, but he's not a good character in it.
No, it's my favourite one, man, in the original trilogy.
With
it
me
just
and this guy.
plays so well, doesn't it?
Can't stop it.
Let's go back.
Overall, though, God of War, though, I feel like that general conversation on godhood and what does it mean to get power, that was the card they played in the 2018 one. They kind of did the thing with Atreus where he realized he had just, a whole bunch of power, then ended up killing Magni and Modi, which meant that Kratos had to reflect on what it's like being around someone who has this power, which is in itself what he did back in God of War 2 when he just realized he was a god and started smashing up, I think it was Athens or whatever, at the start of that game, or Rhodes or whatever. And I think that the whole franchise is this great comment on power. It kind of ties into Odin never stopping and never getting bigger and never just being satisfied with what you have. And I think that it all works. I think they somehow do bring that stuff together as a 17-year, so many thousands of people worked on this arc in a beautiful, beautiful way.
It's really impressive, man. Considering the scale of this game, the fact that they nail things to that level, I love. Can we talk about, before we finish this, this podcast, it feels like a podcast, doesn't it? We've been talking all the time. This video, before we finish this video, about two kind of like plot-specific and lore-specific things that I really did like. One is the twist with Tyr, that where you find out it's actually been Odin the entire time. And second is Brock's death, but specifically the reaction from Sindri.
Yes.
Sindri's reaction is so good. He has been a character you have been able to trust and who has been wanting the best for everyone all the way throughout this game. And then suddenly he's dealing with the death of his family, and you don't get that catharsis of making up with him. He's like, I love that. No, like I let you into my home, and whether he's right or wrong about the idea that it's these other characters' faults that his brother died or not, the fact that he's feeling it and the fact that you can't blame him for feeling it, he's got to grieve how he wants, and you can't just make it right through words. I love that, man. I thought that was such a great twist for that character.
That idea of, grief being a cycle and understanding being a cycle, and he's at the beginning of his cycle and he's not ready to understand yet. If he even wants to, he's very much trapped in the anger of grief, which is completely valid in itself. And it's like, I love him coming in and smashing, like, oh, this is what's next. Like, stop looking, I'll just smash this. I really like that. And there's a funeral scene, but we're going to get into that in another video.
I'm hesitant to compare this to The Last of Us Part 2, but the scene with Sindri reminded me of the scene right at the end of The Last of Us Part 2, where Ellie and Joel, spoilers for that game by the way, have been fractured because of what she finds out about him doing at the end of the first game. And ultimately, nothing he can say is going to get her to forgive him in that moment. She is feeling those emotions, and those emotions are valid, but then at the end, she gets to the point where she says, look, I'm not going to forgive you right now, but I'm willing to work to forgive you in the future. And I feel like with Sindri, we will get to that point eventually, but in this in-between, he's got to feel those feelings, and you can't just say something and make him kind of forget about the fact that he still blames you for his brother dying.
And I also love, just as someone who really didn't like the beginning of this game, just who was just like, oh my god, Atreus, can we just have a conversation without you running off and doing stuff, that there is a lasting consequence to that mentality. And then Sindri just says, I don't even want to talk to you right now, because of the damage that you've done by leading with that mentality. I think that works really, really well. If you're like me and you didn't really get on board with the game until about 15-ish hours in, when more stuff happens. But shout out to Adam John Harrington, that's the dude who plays Sindri. I had to Google his name. Apologies, I had to Google it, but dude's incredible. Sindri's performance in this is eons above 2018's, because the guy gets rounded out so much more. But yeah, let us know what you think down in the comments below. Where did you come down on the final third of God of War Ragnarok and the Ragnarok depiction itself? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.